First Contact Protocol Commander Mira Hayes stood alone at the observation deck of Outpost Sentinel-7, watching the stars with the patience of someone who had learned to read their secrets. 20 years in the diplomatic corps had taught her that. Space wasn't silent. It spoke volumes if you knew how to listen, and right now it was whispering warnings. The holographic display beside her flickered with incoming transmission data. The Valkyrie delegation would arrive within the hour. First official contact with a Level 5 civilization, technologically superior, culturally enigmatic, and according to all intelligence, dangerously pragmatic. Commander, Lieutenant Rice approached from behind, his footsteps deliberately heavy, to announce his presence. "The delegation pod has entered our sensor range. They're early." Hayes nodded without turning. "They would be. Punctuality is a power play too, Race." The lieutenant handed her a neural tablet. "Final briefing from Earth Command. They've added 3 more conditions to the non-negotiables." Hayes scanned the document, her weathered face revealing nothing despite the increasingly restrictive parameters she was being asked to work within. At 53, she had negotiated 17 first contact protocols. None had been with a species that had discovered Earth first. "They're scared," she said simply. "Shouldn't they be?" Race asked. "The Valkyrie mapped our entire solar system before we detected them. They've been watching us for decades." Hayes finally turned, her dark eyes carrying the calm that had earned her the nickname Still Water among other species. "Fear is reasonable, Lieutenant, but when handling predators, you never let them smell it." The Valkyrie vessel that docked at Sentinel-7 defied human aesthetic expectation. Not sleek or imposing, but practical. A vessel designed by beings who valued function over form. Its surface shimmered with a material that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. First Emissary Thale Voss was the first to emerge. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, with silvery skin that caught the light in rippling patterns, the Valkyrie moved with liquid grace. 4 eyes, 2 primary and 2 smaller secondary ones positioned at the temples, surveyed the reception area with unnerving synchronicity. "Commander Hayes." The translation device rendered the Valkyrie's harmonics into crisp English. "Your species' reputation for hospitality precedes you." Hayes extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting, fully aware the Valkyrie had studied this custom. "Emissary Voss, we are honored by your presence at Sentinel-7. Voss regarded the hand with his smaller eyes while maintaining primary eye contact with Hayes, a disorienting experience for most humans. Then he extended his own 7-fingered hand, each digit able to rotate independently. "The honor is mutual, though the concept itself is peculiarly human." Behind Voss, 4 more Valkyrie emerged, each bearing distinctive markings on their foreheads that Hayes knew indicated their scientific specialization. This wasn't just a diplomatic mission. It was research. The observation didn't surprise her. After all, that's what First Contact always was, an elaborate dance of study and counter-study. "Please," Hayes gestured toward the station's conference hall, "allow me to show you to our discussion chambers." The initial talks proceeded with a fluidity that would have reassured someone less experienced than Hayes. The Valkyrie were articulate, reasonable, and impressively knowledgeable about human culture. They expressed interest in trade routes, scientific exchange, and shared defense protocols against the less civilized sectors of the galaxy. Everything they said aligned perfectly with Earth Command's best-case scenario. Too perfectly. During a recess on the second day, Hayes retreated to her private quarters and activated the highest-level encryption for her personal log. Day 2, 1500 hours. "The Valkyrie are lying," she recorded, her voice barely above a whisper. Not about specifics, but about intent. "They're agreeing to everything too readily. No species surrenders technological advantages without resistance unless they're gaining something more valuable." She paused, looking at her reflection in the dark view screen. "They've studied us too well. They know exactly what we want to hear. The question isn't what they're offering, but what they're observing. Hayes shut down the log and stood by her viewport, watching the Valkyrie ship. Unlike humans, the Valkyrie didn't illuminate their vessels externally during dormant periods, another reminder of their evolutionary history as ambush predators on their home world. A soft chime announced Lieutenant Rice at her door. "Enter," she called, not turning from the viewport. "Commander, we've received unusual energy readings from the Valkyrie vessel. Technicians say it might be scanning equipment activating beneath the hull plating." Hayes nodded slowly. "They're scanning our station's infrastructure. Not unexpected. Should we confront them?" "No." Hayes finally turned. "We'll adjust our own scanners to penetrate their hull. Let them think we're oblivious while we gather our own data." Rice shifted uncomfortably. "That's against First Contact Protocol. Earth Command was explicit." "Earth Command isn't here," Hayes said firmly. "And they've never faced a species like the Valkyrie before. We need to understand what we're dealing with." The scan results arrived 3 hours later, encrypted directly to Hayes's neural tablet. What she saw confirmed her suspicions but added new complications. The Valkyrie ship contained holding cells, dozens of them, designed with atmospheric controls, calibrated precisely to human physiological requirements. They hadn't come to trade. They'd come to collect. That night, over what appeared to be a productive dinner discussion about cultural exchange programs, Hayes made her decision. While discussing human art with emissary Voss, she casually mentioned ancient military strategies. Sun Tzu once wrote that all warfare is based on deception, she said, watching Voss carefully. "I've always found it applies equally to diplomacy." Voss's secondary eyes contracted slightly, a tell Hayes had been watching for. "An interesting philosophy. Do you consider our discussions here a form of warfare, Commander?" Hayes smiled. "Not at all. But I do believe understanding comes from seeing beneath the surface." She leaned forward. "For instance, I believe you came here with objectives beyond what's on our official agenda." The room fell silent. The other Valkyrie had stopped eating, all eyes now fixed on Hayes. Voss set down his utensil with deliberate care. "You are remarkably direct for a diplomat." "I find it saves time," Hayes replied. "Your ship is equipped with containment facilities designed for humans. You've studied us not just as potential allies, but as subjects. The question is why?" Instead of denial, Voss's face transformed with what Hayes recognized as the Valkyrie equivalent of a smile, a rippling motion across the facial ridges. Perceptive. Most species don't notice until they're already being processed. He tilted his head. "You understand, Commander, that advanced species must study developing ones. It's how the galactic community maintains balance." "Study doesn't require captivity," Hayes countered. "Doesn't it?" Voss asked. "Your own species kept animal test subjects for centuries. We merely follow the same principle with less advanced civilizations." Hayes maintained her composure, though she felt race stiffen beside her. "And if we decline to be studied?" "That option," Voss said smoothly, "is not available." The masks had fallen. Around the room, the Valkyrie delegation's posture shifted subtly from diplomatic engagement to something more predatory. Hayes nodded as though considering. "I see. And if we were to alert Earth Command?" "Your communications have been monitored since our arrival," Voss explained with disturbing pleasantness. "Your outpost is effectively isolated." "Then why explain your intentions at all?" Hayes asked. "Why, not simply take what you want?" Voss leaned forward, genuinely curious. "Because, Commander Hayes, your psychological response is perhaps the most valuable data we could collect. How does a species like yours process the moment it discovers it is not the apex life form it assumed?" Hayes didn't flinch. "That's a fascinating question, emissary." She took a sip of water before continuing. But it presumes you actually are the apex. Something flickered across Voss's face. Uncertainty, perhaps. It was quickly masked. Your confidence is noted, Commander, but misplaced. We've studied thousands of species across 12 galaxies. Humans are remarkable in your adaptability, but ultimately predictable in your limitations. Hayes stood slowly, smoothing her uniform. Then you have nothing to worry about. What happened next unfolded with practiced precision. The atmospheric controls altered subtly. An odorless compound released into the air. Hayes had expected it, had even calculated the exact moment it would happen based on the Valkyries' physiological tells. As the room's human occupants began to collapse, Race fighting longer than the others thanks to his military-grade lung filters, Hayes locked eyes with Voss. "Protocol Echo," she whispered just before she fell. The last thing she saw was confusion rippling across the emissary's face, the sweet satisfaction of an unexpected variable introduced into what the Valkyrie had thought was a controlled experiment. Hayes awoke in a containment cell aboard the Valkyrie vessel, exactly as she had planned. As her vision cleared, she took in the clinical whiteness of her surroundings, the subtle hum of monitoring equipment, and the transparent wall that would allow her captors to observe her. Beyond that wall stood Emissary Voss, watching her with all four eyes. "You're wondering why I'm not afraid," Hayes said, her voice steady despite the dryness in her throat. "Among other things," Voss admitted, "you knew we would take you, yet you made no real attempt to prevent it." Hayes sat up slowly. "Sometimes, Emissary, the best way to understand a predator is to let yourself be captured." Voss's secondary eyes narrowed. "An unusual strategy with poor survival prospects." Hayes smiled, the smile of someone who knew something her captor didn't. "That depends entirely on what one hopes to survive. The quiet resistance, the research vessel, dominant inquiry moved through deep space with the silent efficiency characteristic of Valkyrie engineering. Within its specialized containment level, Commander Mira Hayes had spent 14 days under constant observation. She maintained her routines with military discipline, physical exercise at precise intervals, meditation during rest periods, and calm, measured responses during interrogations. The lead researcher, Dr. Econ Lath, found her behavior increasingly fascinating and somewhat troubling. "Subject displays unusual psychological resilience," he recorded in his daily log. "Unlike other human specimens, there is no evidence of mental deterioration despite isolation tactics. Recommend advanced cognitive mapping." Hayes was aware of the observation. The transparent walls of her cell were designed to create an illusion of privacy while allowing complete surveillance. She knew every word, every gesture, every physiological response was being documented. This wasn't her first time as a captive, though the Valkyrie didn't know that. When the cell door opened on the 15th day, Hayes didn't look up from her seated position on the floor. "Commander Hayes." Dr. Lath's harmonics were softer than Voss's, pitched to evoke calm. "I hope you are finding your accommodations adequate." Hayes opened her eyes slowly. "Adequate for a laboratory animal, I suppose." Lath's primary eyes blinked. In sequence, a sign of interest among his kind. Standing nearly a foot taller than Hayes, he carried himself with the assurance of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. His silver skin had a bluish undertone that marked him as from the scientific caste. "You misunderstand your situation," he said. "You are not merely a test subject, but a representative of a species of significant interest. Your comfort matters to the validity of our research." Hayes finally stood, facing him directly. "Then perhaps you could explain why you've introduced another human into the adjacent cell who appears to be suffering from acute radiation poisoning." Lath's secondary eyes widened slightly, surprised that she had somehow detected this despite the supposedly isolated cells. "Your observational skills are impressive," he conceded. The male specimen was recovered from a damaged mining vessel. His condition is unfortunate, but provides valuable data on human physiological responses to deep space hazards. His name, Hayes said evenly, is Marcus Chen. He was chief engineer on the prospector mining operation in the Kuiper Belt, and he's dying. The Valkyrie scientist studied her with increased intensity. How could you possibly know his identity? Hayes tapped her temple. You removed my visible implants but missed the passive neural enhancer. Standard issue for diplomatic corps operating. In frontier sectors. It allows limited electromagnetic field detection, enough to sense his engineer's cranial interface through the wall. It was a lie. She had overheard two lab technicians discussing the new specimen during what they thought was her sleep cycle. But the neural enhancer story would make them waste time scanning for technology that didn't exist. Fascinating, Lath murmured. That wasn't in our intelligence about human augmentation capabilities. Hayes shrugged. There's quite a bit your intelligence missed. After a moment's consideration, Lath gestured to an assistant. Bring the engineer to the Comparative Behavioral Laboratory. Let's explore this connection. The comparative laboratory was larger than Hayes's cell, with various stations for testing cognitive and physical abilities. Marcus Chen sat slumped, in a chair when they brought Hayes in, his skin pallid and eyes sunken. Hayes estimated he had weeks at most without proper treatment. Engineer Chen, she said formally, approaching him. The man looked up, confusion briefly crossing his features before recognition set in. Commander Hayes, Sentinel-7 Station? His voice was weak but clear. The same. She sat across from him, ignoring the Valkyrie researchers documenting their interaction. I see our hosts have been equally hospitable to you, Chen managed a weak smile. 5-star accommodations. Can't complain about the view, though. He glanced toward the observation, window where stars streaked by. Where are they taking us? Research facility in the Taurus Reach, if I've calculated our trajectory correctly, Hayes replied. She reached forward as if to comfort him, placing her hand briefly on his. The gesture was simple, human, and perfect cover for her to tap a quick pattern against his wrist. Chen's eyes widened almost imperceptibly before he controlled his reaction. He'd recognized the pattern. Old Earth military code adapted for tactile communication. 5 quick taps, a pause, 3 slow ones, listen only, play along. You'll be all right, Hayes said aloud. The radiation damage can be reversed with proper treatment. They've shown no interest in treating me, Chen replied, following her lead but keeping his tone defeated. Behind the observation glass, Dr. Lath made notes on his tablet. Remarkable how quickly they establish hierarchy, he commented to his assistant. The female immediately assumes a protective role despite having no prior connection to the male. Social. Bonding as survival mechanism? The assistant suggested. Perhaps, Lath zoomed in on Hayes's face. Or something more deliberate. Note how her behavior changed upon seeing him. More animation, more engagement. For the next 2 hours, Hayes and Chen were subjected to various cognitive tests. Problem-solving, scenarios, language processing exercises, stress response evaluations. Throughout, Hayes maintained a deliberate performance, competent but not exceptional, cooperative but not eager. Chen followed her lead, though his deteriorating condition wasn't an act. During a memory pattern test, he began coughing violently, specks of blood appearing on his hand. He needs medical attention, Hayes demanded, her calm finally breaking. Whatever data you hope to gather becomes useless if he dies. Lath observed for a moment longer before nodding to a medical technician. Administer palliative care. Extend viability. As they led Chen away, Hayes caught his eye. The engineer blinked twice. Message received. That night, lying on her bunk under the dim lights of her cell, Hayes closed her eyes but remained alert. The Valkyrie monitored sleep cycles, and she needed them to believe she was unconscious. 3 hours into the night cycle, the expected visit came. The door slid open silently as a medical technician entered to collect biometric readings, standard procedure, but the timing was precise. Hayes had mapped the rotation over the past 2 weeks. The technician moved efficiently, scanning Hayes with a handheld device. When the scanner passed near her head, Hayes opened her eyes. "Now," she whispered. The technician, not Valkyrie but human, froze momentarily before continuing the scan for the benefit of any watchers. "Identification?" the woman asked, barely moving her lips. "Commander Mira Hayes, Earth Diplomatic Corps, authorization Sierra 9 Victor Echo 4. The technician completed her scan. "Confirmed. Timing?" "Accelerated. They've collected Chen. His condition is genuine, but useful. Status of the network. Active. 17 operatives embedded across 3 Valkyrie research vessels, including this. 1. Silent protocol activated 6 days ago when Sentinel-7 went dark." Hayes closed her eyes again as the technician moved toward the door. "Maintain cover. Next contact in 48 hours. After the technician left, Hayes allowed herself a small smile. The pieces were moving exactly as planned. The next morning, Dr. Lath arrived with a new proposition. "We've reviewed your cognitive assessments," he began, standing just inside her. Cell door. "Your results are anomalous compared to our previous human subjects." Hayes sat cross-legged on her bunk. "In what way?" "You display none of the psychological distress patterns typical of isolated humans. Your problem-solving abilities increase under pressure rather than diminish, and you appear to be monitoring us as intently as we monitor you." Lath's 4 eyes fixed on her with clinical fascination. "You are not what we expected." "Perhaps. Your expectations were flawed," Hayes suggested. "Perhaps," Lath agreed, surprising her. "Which is why I've been authorized to offer you a more collaborative arrangement." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Collaboration implies equality. I don't see much evidence of that in my current accommodations." "Circumstances can change," Lath gestured, and the cell door remained open behind him. "Walk with me, Commander. I wish to show you something that may contextualize our interest in your species." Curiosity, genuine this time, prompted Hayes to follow. As they walked through the research vessel's corridors, she noted details that would be valuable later: security protocols, crew rotations, laboratory layouts. Most importantly, she counted 23 human specimens in various stages of study. They arrived at an observation deck overlooking a massive laboratory where several Valkyrie worked around what appeared to be a 3-dimensional star map. "Do you recognize this sector?" Lath asked. Hayes studied the map. "That's the Perseus Void, supposedly uninhabitable due to radiation levels." "Supposedly," Lath echoed. "Yet we've detected unusual activity there over the past decade. Specifically, energy signatures consistent with advanced propulsion systems. Many species explore dangerous regions," Hayes noted carefully. "Indeed. But these signatures correspond precisely with the disappearance of several Valkyrie research vessels." Lath turned to face her directly. "Vessels studying human outposts." Hayes maintained her neutral expression. "That sounds like a security concern, not a scientific one." The distinction blurs when studying potentially dangerous species. Lath manipulated the display, zooming in on a particular region. 3 years ago, a Valkyrie long-range scout disappeared here, on the edge of human territory. Before communication was lost, they transmitted fragmentary data about a human facility unlike any we had cataloged. The image sharpened to show a space station with unconventional architecture, asymmetrical, almost organic in its design. Our analysts concluded it was either a weapons platform or a specialized research facility," Lath continued. "But when a follow-up mission arrived, both the human facility and our scout ship were gone." No debris, no radiation signature, no evidence they had ever existed. Space is dangerous, Hayes observed neutrally. Things disappear. Things don't simply disappear, Commander. They are removed. Lath closed the display. Which brings me to my proposition. We believe humans possess technologies or capabilities we have failed to detect through conventional observation. Technologies that might explain these disappearances. And you want me to confirm your theories? Hayes asked. I want you to help us understand what we're truly dealing with, Lath replied. In exchange for significantly improved conditions for you and the other human subjects aboard this vessel. Hayes considered her response carefully. What makes... You think I have access to such information? Because you aren't afraid of us, Commander. Lath's voice lowered. From the moment of your capture, you've behaved like someone executing a plan rather than someone enduring a trauma. That suggests you know something we don't. Hayes allowed a small smile. Or perhaps I'm simply well-trained to handle captivity. Perhaps, Lath conceded. But there's a simpler explanation. You wanted to be captured. The accusation hung in the air between them. Hayes neither confirmed nor denied it. Consider my offer, Lath said finally. Cooperation would benefit both our species. As she was escorted back to her cell, Hayes passed the medical bay where Chen was being treated. Through the window, she caught his eye. He blinked once, then tapped his fingers against his bed rail. 3 days. That night, Hayes received another visit, this time from emissary Voss himself. Dr. Lath believes you're some kind of human operative, Voss said without preamble, standing rigidly in her cell. That your capture was deliberate. Hayes remained seated on her bunk. And what do you believe, emissary? I believe humans are adaptable, but not prescient. You couldn't have anticipated our interest in your outpost. Yet, here we are, Hayes noted. Me in a cell, you questioning your assumptions. Voss's secondary eyes narrowed, a sign of irritation. Explain the facility in the Perseus Void. I can't explain what I know nothing about. Then explain this. Voss activated a small projector that displayed a familiar symbol, a stylized helix, intertwined with what appeared to be a neural network pattern. This marking was found on personal items belonging to 3 different humans we've studied, including your Lieutenant Rice. Hayes recognized the symbol immediately but kept her expression neutral. It was the emblem of Project Chimera, humanity's ultra-classified adaptive defense initiative. The fact that the Valkyrie had seen it at all represented a significant intelligence breach. It appears to be a decorative pattern, she said dismissively. Humans often adorn their possessions with meaningless symbols. Our analysts disagree. The mathematical precision suggests a communication function. Voss leaned closer. What is silent protocol, Commander Hayes? The question confirmed what Hayes had suspected. They had intercepted communications but lacked context to understand them. A diplomatic contingency, she replied truthfully but incompletely. Standard procedure when communication with headquarters is compromised. Voss studied her for signs of deception. Finding none obvious enough to detect, he straightened. We will continue this discussion tomorrow. Consider your position carefully. The welfare of your fellow humans aboard depends on your cooperation. After he left, Hayes closed her eyes and began the mental countdown. 3 days until whatever Chen had set in motion came to fruition. 3 days to maintain the deception. 3 days until the Valkyrie discovered exactly what humanity had become in the long, dark centuries while they prepared for the stars. Apex response. The alarm began subtly, a fluctuation in the ambient lighting that might have been dismissed as a power variance. Dr. Econ Lath noticed it first, his secondary eyes detecting the frequency shift that human vision would miss. He paused mid-sentence during his morning interrogation of Commander Hayes. Something's wrong, he murmured, more to himself than to his prisoner. Hayes didn't react. She sat perfectly still, her expression neutral as the lights flickered again, more pronouncedly this time. "Your ship seems to be having technical difficulties," she observed mildly. Lath's communication implant chimed with an incoming priority alert. His expression shifted as he received information directly to his neural cortex. Concern, then confusion, followed quickly by the first traces of alarm. "This conversation will continue later," he said abruptly, moving toward the door. "No," Hayes replied with quiet certainty. "It won't." Lath paused, turning back to study her face. "You know something." "I know many things, Doctor. For instance, I know exactly how long it takes for a quantum-entangled virus to propagate through a Valkyrie neural computing network. Approximately 67 hours from initial infection to system collapse." The lights flickered again, then stabilized at half brightness as emergency protocols engaged. A low-frequency alarm began to pulse through the ship. "Impossible," Lath whispered. "Our systems are biologically shielded against conventional digital attacks." "Yes," Hayes finished for him. "But Engineer Chen wasn't carrying anything conventional. His radiation sickness is real, but it wasn't an accident." Understanding dawned in Lath's eyes. "He was deliberately exposed." Hayes nodded once. "Gamma radiation at precisely 1.47 tera-electron volts for 18 minutes. Enough to create specific mutations in human cellular structure that your sensors would register as radiation poisoning, but actually serving as organic carriers for—" Lath couldn't complete the question. "We call them chimera particles, programmable organic synthetic hybrids that respond to specific bioelectric signals." Hayes stood slowly. "Chen transmitted the activation code through his neural implant the moment your medical team connected him to your ship's diagnostic systems." The door to Hayes's cell slid open without anyone activating the controls. Throughout the corridor, beyond, other doors were opening as the ship's systems began to malfunction. "You should gather your research team in the primary laboratory," Hayes suggested calmly. "It's the safest location during what comes next." Lath's composure slipped. For the first time since Hayes had met him. "You've doomed everyone aboard." "No," she corrected him. "I've initiated a conversation on more equal terms." The ship lurched suddenly, artificial gravity fluctuating. Emergency containment fields shimmered into existence at key junctions, the vessel's automatic response to catastrophic system failures. Hayes stepped past the stunned scientist into the corridor. Other humans were emerging from their cells, disoriented but quickly organizing themselves. Hayes recognized the pattern. They weren't random test subjects. They were plants, operatives like herself who had allowed themselves to be captured. "Status?" she asked a young woman who approached with the bearing of military training. "Chimera particles at 87% saturation," the woman reported. "Ship's navigation and weapons systems are compromised. Communications limited to internal only." "And the crew?" "Contained but unharmed per protocol." Hayes nodded with approval. "Find Chen. Make sure he receives proper medical treatment." As the operative departed, Emissary Voss appeared at the end of the corridor, flanked by armed security personnel. Their weapons were drawn but flickering with unstable energy, affected by the same system-wide failure. "What have you done?" Voss demanded, his usual diplomatic veneer stripped away by crisis. "Created an opportunity for honesty," Hayes replied. She turned to Lath, who still stood frozen in the doorway of what had been her cell. "Doctor, would you care to join us? I believe the observation deck would be appropriate for what comes next." Surrounded by humans who now moved with confident purpose, rather than subservient caution, the Valkyrie leadership had little choice but to comply. The small procession made its way through corridors where emergency lighting cast everything in crimson shadows. The observation deck provided a panoramic view of space around the vessel. Currently, it showed only empty darkness, until Hayes approached the control panel. "Disengage camouflage fields," she instructed. The view screen flickered, recalibrated, and suddenly the empty space transformed. Surrounding the Valkyrie research vessel was a fleet of ships unlike any they had documented in human possession. Sleek, dark vessels with minimal external lighting and organic-looking hull configurations that defied conventional design principles. Impossible, Voss breathed. These ships weren't there seconds ago. They've been here since we left Sentinel-7, Hayes corrected him, tracking us the entire journey. Lath stepped closer to the view screen, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his alarm. Our sensors would have detected them. Your sensors detect what they're programmed to recognize, Hayes explained. These vessels utilize technology derived from studies of species you've never encountered, or more accurately, species you encountered and dismissed as non-sentient. She activated a communication channel with a series of hand gestures recognized by the now compromised ship systems. This is Commander Hayes to Chimera Actual. Phase 1 complete. Begin Phase 2. A voice responded, calm and measured. Acknowledged, Commander. Phase 2 initiated. Stand by. The surrounding fleet began to shift position, not with the mechanical precision of typical spacecraft maneuvers, but with fluid, almost organic movements. Several smaller vessels approached, taking up positions that effectively immobilized the Valkyrie ship. You should sit, Hayes suggested to the Valkyrie officials. This will be disorienting. Before they could respond, a ripple of energy passed through the observation deck, through the entire ship. It felt like a change in air pressure followed by a momentary sensation of falling despite gravity remaining constant. The Valkyrie reacted more severely, several dropping to their knees as their internal equilibrium systems struggled to adapt. Quantum field stabilized, the voice from the fleet announced. Initiating neural handshake. A holographic interface materialized in the center of the observation deck, a three-dimensional representation of a neural network far more complex than standard communication systems. What is this? Voss demanded, recovering his composure with visible effort. This, Hayes said, is silent protocol. Humanity's response to the discovery that we weren't alone in the universe and that much of what existed beyond our solar system viewed us as subjects rather than equals. The neural network pulsed, and suddenly a new presence filled the observation deck, not physically, but as a consciousness that seemed to permeate the space itself. When it spoke, the voice emerged from the ship's own communication systems. I am Admiral Catherine Chen, commanding officer of the Earth Deep Space Initiative. You are currently within a quantum-locked defensive perimeter. Your vessel's functional status is at our discretion. Voss straightened, falling back on diplomatic training. This is an act of war against the Valkyrie Concordat. No, the disembodied voice corrected. This is a proportionate response to the abduction of Earth diplomatic personnel and the violation of sovereign human space. Commander Hayes was authorized to trigger silent protocol if she confirmed hostile intent. Lath looked at Hayes with new understanding. You were bait. I was a verification mechanism, she corrected. We needed to confirm what we suspected about your research program. The Admiral's voice continued. For the past 30 years, the Valkyrie Concordat has abducted human subjects from outposts and vessels across 12 sectors. You've studied us like laboratory specimens while presenting yourselves as potential allies. The end.